Welcome to the Star Wars Connection, Reylo 101. Today we'll be talking about the interactions of Rey and Kylo Ren, along with the evidence that supports a potential romantic connection. I'm your host, Tina, and with me today are Lee and Denise. Okay, let's get started.
Well, when talking about evidence for Reylo, I think that there has been quite a bit of discussion. We've talked about it at length in other podcasts, so we won't go into super specific details here about things that we've already discussed. Suffice it to say that there have been a lot of great metas written about what it is that makes the romantic connection between Rey and Kylo Ren not just possible, but probable. And all of this is based on observations of what was shown in The Force Awakens. So just as a bit of a kind of in a nutshell overview, it's important to think about why is Kylo Ren being presented to us as a typical Byronic hero? Why is he tall, handsome, with the gorgeous hair? Why is he emotionally conflicted and presenting as somebody with strong ideals, somebody who is considered reprehensible morally, definitely dangerous, charismatic? Why is it that when you look at Kylo Ren, you can think, well, he might as well be Mr. Darcy, he might as well be Heathcliff? Romantic heroes that appeal so much to a broad fan base. And then when you think about that and you see Kylo Ren looking Rey up and down and taking her in his arms and carrying her off like a bride, and what does that mean? What symbolism does that carry when the man carries the woman like that? This is stuff that is ingrained into us. These are messages that are not being invented today. These are things that we have seen in literature and in art for centuries, for millennia even. It all means something. It's all a conscious decision. Add to that the fact that we're talking about these characters and their complex and passionate dynamics existing in the context of what is essentially a soap opera in space, where an epic story typically involves a dramatic, passionate relationship between the two romantic leads, as opposed to wholesome, cute people having an uncomplicated relationship that is fluffy and sweet. And not that that isn't great, and not that that's not what you want in real life, but we're talking about an epic love story. Typically, there's tragedy, there's passion, there's a forbidden element to it, and what two other characters would better exemplify that than Rey and Kylo? So all of this, the discussion about the camera angles, the choker shots, the fact that to many people there was a very palpable sexual tension between Rey and Kylo Ren from the moment that they meet. Like, for example, the Force duel that was just crackling with sexual energy to a lot of people, not just to Reylos, even people in the media, people who reviewed it noticed it. When you put all of this together, you start to make a case for, wait a minute, why aren't we seriously considering the possibility of Rey and Kylo Ren having a romance that actually seems very obvious when you examine what was presented on film? We are going to be sharing some resources where you can find out more about this, but we really aren't going to focus on that aspect as much because that's already been covered and more extensively than we're looking to get into at this point. So we're going to focus on other aspects of it. For example, going on to talk a little bit about what else we see really supporting this pairing aside from what we've discussed, what is shown in the film. Let's talk about Reylo in the context of other canon romances. So if you notice, there are some parallels between what's going on between Rey and Kylo Ren and what has occurred in the other two film romances, which are Han and Leia and Padme and Anakin. From the get-go, the other two canonical couples started out as people that you would never think to pair together, from completely different circumstances and kind of an odd couple in a way, but then somehow it works when they're together. So we see, for example, Padme was a queen and Annie was a slave boy, right? And there was an age difference between them that kind of made it weird to even think that they would end up hooking up later on when we start out with them. And then Han and Leia, she's a princess and a senator and he's a scoundrel. And in the beginning, it looks like she's going to end up with Luke. But you see this kind of tension and chemistry and banter, and it's just fun and exciting when they're together and talking. And that's kind of hinting towards what's going to happen later on. And then the same thing with Rey and Kylo Ren. When you start out, you have these two characters. He's a royal, she's a scavenger, he's bad, she's good. No way that they can ever be together. That's what it seems like on the surface. But as you dig deeper, you see that, yeah, that there is a possibility for this to happen. One other thing we wanted to talk about about was this theory that has been making the rounds probably from early on in the Reylo camp, is the possibility that Kylo Ren and Rey could be the correction of the ill-fated romance between Padme and Anakin. And when I say ill-fated, I mean both in the story and also among the fandom, because a lot of people hate that pairing. They thought that the characters, aside from the fact that it was terrible for them how things ended, people thought that the actors did not have chemistry, and that was one of the weaker points of the prequel trilogy. The shipping name for the people who don't know is Anidala, Anakin and Amidala. When you think of that being corrected, it's basically being reversed. Do you have any thoughts on that, Tina?
Yeah, I am a very big fan of this theory as far as what we like to call reverse Anidala. So Anakin, obviously he had a great love for Padme that was manipulated by Emperor Palpatine. What should have been something good turned into something selfish, something, they felt they had to hide. And in the end, he fell to the dark side because of his love for Padme. We all know what happened. Padme ended up dying, in childbirth. Presumably she died of a broken heart. So, like Lee said, this is kind of the correction of that. Whereas Anakin fell to the dark side because of his love for Padme, I kind of see this as Rey being the motivating factor for Kylo's redemption through, instead of a selfish love, a selfless love. He's going to want to make better choices to correct the path that he's currently on, make better decisions. And, like I said, combined with a more sympathetic backstory, Rey in turn would reciprocate his love and, in fact, balance the Force and correct the Skywalker line and bring Leia home her son. And of course there were contributing factors to Anakin's fall too, not just Padme, but of course the death of his mother. And I guess that brings up another point. We really don't know what's going to happen with Carrie Fisher, and as far as Leia's arc, what's going to happen. There's a bunch of different things that could happen, but as far as that goes, I'm not really sure what they're gonna do with that. Anakin in reverse, it kind of comes down to Anakin falling because of selfish love and Kylo redeeming himself because of selfless love.
One other interesting parallel that we can find here is between Kylo Ren and Anakin's fall to the dark side and turning to the light. So when Anakin fell to the dark side, his romantic love for Padme wasn't enough to bring him back. Even though she begged him and told him, "You're going somewhere I can't follow, you're breaking my heart," that wasn't enough to get him to turn back. And it took his son, Luke, years later to help him turn back to the light. So familial love was what brought him back, where romantic love could not. With Kylo Ren, it might end up being just the opposite. When he fell to the dark side, his parents and his uncle tried to reach him, and we hear Han tell Leia, "We did everything we could, but it wasn't enough." So maybe what is needed is romantic love, and that could be Rey. So that would be a really nice kind of inverted character arc.
Yeah, I think that's really cool.
And when you think of Rey and Kylo, and this is one of the things that struck me about these two characters, they're both the loneliest people in the galaxy far, far away. I don't think I could tell which character is more lonely. They both are. And for them to find the belonging in each other, I think that has the potential to be a really beautiful story. And again, one of the things that struck me when it dawned on me on my first viewing what was going on was Star Wars has always been a story of hope and redemption. And of course, you also have that central love story that may or may not be associated with that. And I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. They're combining those three elements of love, hope, and redemption all into one story arc. And it made complete sense to me. And I never, really anticipated the negative reactions that we discussed that people would have to it. I thought, okay, for me it was just a given, like, wow, that's fantastic, because I never thought that it veered away from the core of what those stories are about.
Something else is there are some words that are very powerful in the Star Wars saga, which when you think about them in context, they can kind of be foreshadowing for Reylo. For example, when you think of the word compassion, when you think of Anakin telling Padme that the Jedi are encouraged to have compassion, and so that means that they're encouraged to love. And then when you think about Snoke telling Kylo Ren in an accusatory way in the novelization, you have compassion for her. And Kylo Ren is like, what? No, for an enemy of the Order? Never. Because what does compassion mean? Kylo Ren is compassionate towards Rey, and hopefully she will become compassionate towards him. I think for me that's a given, because heroes show compassion and give people second chances, especially in Star Wars. Then there's still light in him. Padme says it about Anakin, and she believes it to the very end. And Leia says it about Kylo. She's sure of it. There's still light in him. So more foreshadowing that Kylo will be redeemed. And then also going back to Padme and Anakin, kind of like the denial of, I'm not ever going to give in to this, she says to Anakin. And Leia says to Han, I'd rather kiss a Wookiee than kiss you. And then Kylo Ren says to Snoke, I would never have compassion for an enemy of the Order. And then he says in the movie, by the grace of your training, I will not be seduced. So he's talking about seduced to the light side, but if you think of it literally, he's saying like he's never going to be seduced by anything or anyone, but he might be proven wrong, just like all the other characters were before.
Going back to that, and actually I wanted to follow up because this is something I caught today when I was watching TFA. Right after Kylo says, by the grace of your training, I will not be seduced, it cuts to Rey on the Falcon going, I can fix this. And she's trying to fix the Millennium Falcon by bypassing the compressor. Well, if you think of the compressor as Snoke, she's trying to bypass that and save something that's very dear to Han Solo that he can't save himself. So if Rey hadn't been on there, the Falcon would have been blown to bits. I mean, aside from Han and everybody else dying, but the Falcon would have been lost, which is obviously a very important thing to Han. Now, obviously, his son, we all know is important to him as well. So I thought that was actually kind of a great parallel.
They do really cool cuts like that in The Force Awakens. If you remember when Kylo says, what girl, it cuts to Rey.
And they're reaching for each other.
Right. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I also think there's the symbolism of the light. You're saying Rey, her name's upon, right? And he's like seduced by the light, and this how it's interesting that he's gonna be seduced by the light, which is interesting, and it supports the pairing.
One thing I forgot to mention as far as like powerful words across the saga is the whole "do not be afraid" thing. Han says it to Leia, before their first kiss, and she says, "I'm not frightened." And then Padme and Anakin have a conversation also in that vein before they're going out to the arena, supposedly to rescue Obi-Wan. He tells her, don't be afraid, and she says, I'm not frightened. And then Kylo Ren tells Rey, don't be afraid, I feel it too. So again, very cool parallels there, and I don't think that's a coincidence. Now, as far as we've talked about a possible Force bond in many of our previous episodes, people say, well, you guys are making stuff up. You're ripping stuff off from Harry Potter just to twist things into something, to fit your sick Reylo obsession. Well, no, actually, we have seen precedents in Star Wars of characters connecting through the Force. For example, Luke and Darth Vader, after they have their first lightsaber duel, and Luke learns that this is his father, he tells Leia that, I can feel his presence and he knows that I'm here. And they actually communicate with each other. They talk to each other. And then Luke's able to reach out to Leia to go rescue him after he gets his hand chopped off. So we have precedents in canon, in the films, of characters through the Force being able to connect intimately, share thoughts, and even locate and track each other. So after that powerful moment with the lightsaber in the snow fight, with Rey and Kylo kind of connected, and even Daisy Ridley describing it as them finding the Force together, after that happened, I think it's obvious that they're going to have some kind of further connection in the Force.
They're finding the Force or whatever, remember?
Yes, I remember when she said that, and then she covered her mouth, and she was like, I shouldn't have said that. Like
whoops.
Yeah, okay.
Cat's out of the bag again.
Yeah, going back to that, even on my first viewing, before I had ever heard the word Force bond, it was clear to me in the final snow fight, she was taking things and learning from him. And that went back to the interrogation scene. And then later on, I found out in canon, master and apprentice often have a Force bond, and it's basically used for defense and offense as far as, being able to protect one another. They can gather from the data bank of skills from either their master or vice versa, the apprentice. So I thought that was interesting. And given the fact that he also offers to teach her, that could be foreshadowing. Who knows? That could be foreshadowing something else.
One last comment, I think, people say, it's sexist because he's stronger than her. No, that's not the case. But one thing that I find really cool is how he admires her when she has power, right? He almost looks up to her, and it's a dynamic that I really like, because she doesn't need to be afraid of being powerful or have to, be less than him to be interesting.
Oh, his face when she catches the saber blows me away every time. I love that face. I call that the marry me face, because he's just so enamored. Like, he's not even angry. And this is a character that's like defined by his anger, and he's so not that at that moment.
He obviously, he obviously admires her. He's amazed by her. He looks at her in wonderment. He's obviously intrigued by her, and when he's in her mind, he's just kind of there's a little bit of voyeurism there. But then then when she catches that saber, the look on his face, he's just blown away by this girl. And then he tells her, you need a teacher. Like, he's thinking about how she can be even greater than she already is. So he's obviously a big fan of Rey's.
Yeah, which is great, right?
Yeah.
You're right, though, about the wheels turning in his head as soon as, he realizes, who she is, what she's capable of. He loves her for her power. A lot of men would be intimidated by that. He revels in it.
One thing that you had mentioned, Tina, earlier was the fact that there are fairy tale elements in Reylo, and I think that's really important. And by the way, the first person to mention that was actually JJ. In his director's commentary, he talks about, I'm just going to read from him. He says, in this scene, she is drawn to this place, almost like Cinderella. Speaking about the design of Maz's castle, he says, the location of Maz's castle, mirrors the cantina, and he's talking about how they look at Star Wars as a Western or a fairy tale. What are the elements that you're going to see that make this genre? Clearly, in a Western, you're going to have a dusty saloon and cowboys. In a fairy tale, you're going to have a castle, a prince, and a princess. So, okay, we have a prince in Kylo Ren. He himself described Adam Driver as looking like a prince when he unmasked. Clearly, this is a deliberate choice that they made to insert these elements to make it more fairy tale-like. Then if you actually break down the scenes between Rey and Kylo, you have their first meeting on Takodana, and it's gorgeous. There's like this lush green forest where it feels like anything can happen. Anything mystical or magical. And then you have Kylo Ren coming in masked, and he's like a monster, basically. And they have this meeting, but it turns out that he's more than just a monster. He's a royal, Princess Leia's son, and he's been transformed and twisted into this thing. But underneath that, that Ben is still there. So that there's a very fairy tale-ish element in how they meet and who they are as characters. He's a prince, she's a scavenger. And then there's this whole, she knew this man from a daydream, from a nightmare, and their whole lightsaber duel, it kind of reminds a lot of people of Sleeping Beauty. Them dancing in the forest, the lightsaber battling can be like a choreography. So it's pretty clear that they're setting up these characters in a romantic fairy tale-ish kind of context.
On the forest, I have a quote here. When he sees her, he says, having circled her from the novelization, having circled her, he moved even closer, peering into her face, her eyes. Then the red lightsaber he held came up. Don't like it. Anyways, but then he says something. He sounded mystified. There's something. Who are you? So yes, there is that element of.
And he says, it is you. It is you. That right away reminds me of Beauty and the Beast. After he transforms into Adam the Prince, and she says, it is you. And when she's looking at him after he unmasks, it reminds me a little bit of when Belle breaks into the Beast's room and finds the painting of him that's slashed. She's peering at it, kind of looking at it in kind of wonderment and curious. Kind of like how Rey looked at Kylo Ren. I mean, if you look at it, there's elements of Beauty and the Beast for sure. And there's elements of Sleeping Beauty. I know you, I saw you before. Especially really cool if you think they maybe were communicating before meeting by seeing visions of each other. But definitely the elements are there to make it appealing to people who love fairy tales, and Star Wars is a space fairy tale.
Yeah, I remember a question was given to Pablo Hidalgo. Somebody had asked them, what do I need to study to work at Lucasfilm? And he said, and this is an exact quote, he said, study fairy tales, study mythology, study the most non-Star Wars things you can think of. I mean, he very much focused on mythology and fairy tales, and I mean, that tells you right there, a lot of the things that you need to know.
Exactly.
So what are you guys looking forward to seeing in this dynamic?
I don't know if there's going to be a romance between them, like as apparent as I would want for it to be. I would hate it if they left Kylo and Rey kind of like just with undertones. I would like for them to have like a kiss and an acknowledged romantic relationship. But regardless of whether or not that doesn't happen, I'm certain that we're going to see Rey have compassion for Kylo, get to know him because he's conflicted. She already saw that in his mind. And I think as they continue to communicate, we'll see that. And I think that she'll be able to help him turn back to the light. I would love it if it turned out to be a romantic arc. And I'm perfectly fine if at the end, when all is said and done, they walk away together and go explore the Force, go learn more about it, maybe teach together. I think that would be awesome.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I'm hoping for too. I am definitely hoping for a happy ending for these two. And last week, I think Kathleen Kennedy tweeted that, Star Wars is always built on hope. Basically, an ending that would be very satisfying. And when she said that, that really put the wind in my sails because I too am hoping for that happy ending where the family is reunited and they can continue, as Lee said, to either teach or continue the family line, whatever, they choose to do.
Yeah. I'm the evil one. I want an epic love story, and I want him to bite the dust at the end, or her, because it's
No.
epic. And I don't want a wishy-washy. I think it's gonna start now. I think most epic stories and love stories have this thing of tragedy, and you feel that pain. I think it's gonna be actually awesome, like something really tragic at the end.
Yeah, I'm not hoping for bittersweet.
I think we already got tragedy in the Padme and Anakin story, like big time, and there's still repercussions from that fated star-crossed love. So I don't think I need to see that again with Kylo and Rey. And I think there are going to be other sources of tragedy, and unfortunately, like we said with Carrie Fisher's passing, and they're not going to have her in the rest of the saga after her part is over with what she already filmed. So I think that we are going to see a loss of Leia at some point. We already lost Han, so I don't think we need more tragedy. I do want an epic romance, but I want a happy ending. I hope we get one.
Something I think they're gonna do, and I'm hoping for, is that they're gonna make new Skywalkers to have more problems in the galaxy.
And you can't have that with a bittersweet ending with him dying.
Well, if they do it before,
Yeah.
The other thing is, if you think about it, like Rey is looking for a family and belonging, and people really want Rey to be a Skywalker. There's a way that can happen if she and Kylo end up getting married at the end.
Yeah, definitely. So here's another question for you guys. I'm curious to know like where you guys stand on this. Do we see a kiss happening between the two of them in say like episode 8 or episode 9?
I do, of course. I think that we have to get a kiss in the second installment of this trilogy. I think it's tradition. We must see a kiss, and I hope it's a good one.
But
Me too.
I remember that we're gonna get one between Finn and Rose, which I think it's gonna be adorable. I'm not sure if I see a kiss, but I see something happening already, because you see Rey. Oh, my character in this movie, I forgot what she said. You might not like what she does, and I think there are signs that she's coming for something different.
Yeah, we can see a force kiss though. I think that is more likely than an actual real kiss.
I see it happening two ways. The first way, of course, and like you said, there's always a kiss in the second trilogy. I think Finn and Rose might happen early on, from what I've read, that Finn falls hard and fast for this this new character of Rose. So I think we're going to get a kiss between those two early on, and I think the audience will think, well, okay, that fulfills that requirement. Now, a kiss between Kylo and Rey, it could happen two ways. Of course, like you said, through a vision, which I think would be the easiest way to get there and the most believable way to get there. That would leave them both, if that happened to them both at the same time. Oh, did the other feel it, and they're feeling like feelings of guilt, doubt, wrongness, or rightness, however you want to put that. But that could be very interesting from that perspective, to watch these characters kind of flounder around going, oh my God, what just happened? The second way, of course, would be an accidental kiss. Just a spur of the moment, they're fighting tooth and nail lightsabers again, and he just lays one on her. And then he's like, what did I just do?
Yeah, I think they're gonna be allies, at least at some point in this movie. That I expect, their dynamic to change, but I'm not sure about how romantic it's gonna get.
Yeah, I do anticipate loads of UST and sexual tension from what we've seen. And I think that's going to be more in your face of the audience this time around.
That concludes part 2 of the Star Wars Connection Reylo 101. Please email us with questions at starwarsconnection09@gmail.com or find us on Twitter, Instagram, or Tumblr. Don't miss out on the rest of our discussion, concluding with part 3, which can be found on YouTube. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.